You're listening to Charting the Future, a podcast for independent pediatricians by PCC. For more information about our software and services, please visit www.pcc.com or visit us on social media.
All right, friends, I'm back with another episode of Charting the Future. This week, I thought it would be interesting. We had really great feedback from the podcast I did with Morgan from PCC and giving insight about ERX. Plus, people liked the fact that she made fun of me a little bit. And so I thought this week I would bring in two guests from PCC because we have, like you, been exploring is too light a word. We've been really digging deeply into AI and how it's going to affect our clients, not just from a charting perspective, but from everything. And we have some, I would say, some uber nerds here. These aren't the only two, but they're good two reps for them. And we've learned a lot about AI. And I thought they might help us give some insight and maybe help you as pediatricians get an understanding of the promise and the danger of what AI will bring to us. By the time this podcast is out, something is going to hit your practice with it. You might not just know it yet. And so these two have been working on our integrated AI Scribe project. And this isn't going to be a sales pitch, don't worry. But they're going to let you sort of peek behind the curtain and see what kind of challenges and problems that we've had while doing this and what you might want to know as a pediatrician, maybe as you talk to your own vendor or as you help or as you Scribe tool for yourself. I don't know if I told you this, guys. I'll let them introduce themselves in a second. But when I was just at 2 weeks worth of conferences at Women in Pediatrics and at Pediatric CEO, there were multiple doctors in the room who just opened their laptop, turned on their AI Scribe for their EHR, and recorded each talk. And then they got a good summary of the talk. And they showed me. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's so much better. This is the other thing I saw. At the conference, there are multiple talks going on. You can only pick one. People were taking their little AI brick, okay, this thing's this big, and they hit play, and they drop it in the back of the room, and they go to one talk, and then they come back, and they get the full summary of the other talk. This is like Space 1999 for me. Anyway, I have here with me Scott Kirby and Brian LaClair. I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourselves and tell our audience what cool thing you do for PCC. So, Scott, who are you? What do you do?
Hey, yeah, thanks. I'm Scott Kirby. I'm a longtime PCCer, I guess, not compared to you, Chip, but I've been around for a little over 10 years in a variety of roles. But for most of that time and right now, I provide strategic and technical leadership for our clinical data exchange team, looking at interoperability products and features.
All right, cool. Brian, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, I'm Brian LaClair. I'm the baby of the group, apparently. I've only been at PCC for about 4 years. I started off here as an integration developer on Scott's team. So that's wiring up all the pipes that we need to send data from one place to the next. And now my position has swapped a little bit and I'm referred to as a special projects developer, which means that I get to focus on really cool new things like AI and a lot of other technologies.
I just realized if you multiply your time at PCC times your time at PCC, you get my time at PCC. All right. It's like we're talking about it like it's a prison. So I've been on death row for 37 years.
We love it here.
Yeah, exactly. We love it here.
It's a prison with great food.
Me blink SOS into the... Yep. So the reason I invited you guys here is because we're about to roll out an integrated AI Scribe, which is that's the present that everyone has wanted to open for their birthday for the last 2 years. We have a lot of clients who've been using their own, and they're really eager to try ours out. And I'd love it. Of course, we haven't scripted any of this, so we'll see how well our mutual conversation goes. But I'd love it if we can share with the doctors what kind of things we've seen along the way from interviewing the third-party tools. Like, because if someone were doing it right, we would have just said, come on in, but we struggled there. And then what sort of struggles we've had building our tools and what you think is going to be happening in the future with those tools. I'm just going to let you two duke it out to see who has the most to say.
I think we can. I think there's a mutual beginning of this story of how PCC even came to looking at AI scribing in general. For a long time, I think as most people do feel, there was a lot of hesitation around generative AI tools in the, not even just in the practice, but in day-to-day life, right? And so for about a year or so, I think we all just kind of were getting our own grasp of the landscape. We saw these tools becoming more and more popular in the browser. So our clients were using them, some clients were using them. I think from what we saw, maybe a smaller percentage than in other segments of the medical landscape, but we could see that it was growing. And there were more and more practitioners that were asking us for some sort of guidance or integration for AI scribing. And yeah, I mean, Scott, if you want to take it from there, as far as, we started in earnest looking at vendors or vendors that could help us even before May of last year. What was that initially like? Like, we talked to a lot of people.
We did, yeah. And I remember both going to HIMSS, the sort of health IT conference, and talking to a lot of different AI Scribe vendors who had sort of popped up as it became somewhat in vogue, and trying to get a sense of what unique elements, if any, the different vendors had, what specifically their value proposition was in terms of providing AI Scribe functionality specific to, healthcare in general, but, pediatric specialty.
Mm-hmm.
That was another thing we were looking for. We were really interested in concerns that I'm sure we'll speak to more in this conversation about privacy, sort of how data was handled in their pipelines, what the overall cost was and what their business models were, how that would, we generally like to keep costs low for our clients, and, would working with this or that outfit let us do that? And ease of integration, things like that. How much development work would we have to put into rigging up an integration with an existing scribe versus how much would it take for us to go direct to LLMs and build out the associated UI as well. So yeah, we went through a big checklist. We talked to a lot of the big names, and then we followed up after talking to some of them in person for more in-depth demos. And there were a lot of interesting ones. A lot of them have similar functionality, and some more relevant to pediatric specialty than others, some better for integration than others, and so on. But I think, and I'll pass this back to Brian, because I think this was something that really developed in his mind as we were going through the technical details. I think it became apparent to us after mucking around with some of the API and integration documentation, and indeed, sandboxes for some of these products, that ultimately we were running into the problem of getting sort of fenced into their mode of interacting with the underlying technologies. And there was a certain inflexibility that seemed like it was going to come to us if we went the integration route, as opposed to building pipelines to the large language models and defining how our clients could interact with them through our product set itself, but keeping a flexible backend that we could kind of customize. And yeah, and I will kick that back over to Brian, because that was really something that we talked about a lot, and he had strong ideas, and I think the right ideas about.
Yeah, and I think maybe strong feelings about in different regards too, that I'll probably touch on. Like, everybody is sick of, everyone that we talk to, every pediatrician that we talk to is sick of copying and pasting. So there were a bunch of vendors that we talked to that had zero interest in sort of our integrated vision of what an ambient scribe would look like in PCC EHR. So those were almost non-starters to us. We would be talking to these vendors that, their product would, as Scott's mentioning, more or less the same as the other ones we've looked at. There were people that would be somewhat flabbergasted at the idea that we even wanted to put it into the EHR directly. They're like, well, couldn't you just do it this other way? And we're like, no, like that's not good for anybody. As Scott was mentioning, the lock-in was pretty extreme, as far as if we chose any vendor that we were looking at, they really wanted our clients to exist within their ecosystem, where PCC has no real assurance that their data is being treated responsibly and handled carefully. And that freaked us all out, I think, especially looking at some of the vendors out there that, we see their long-term path as like building what we've already built, as far as having their own ecosystem that is an EHR adjacent product. Whereas for us, we want the best possible deal for our clients. Mm-hmm. And so if we're going to invest in anything like that, we want it to be PCC EHR.
Right. And keep our clients, we don't want our clients to wake up someday and have all their data hijacked. Or now suddenly you got to pay twice as much to access it. Or we've seen all this stuff before. Now, you don't want to open the paper and be like, and see that there was a breach somewhere and say, wait a second, isn't that the company that I pay all this money to?
Or even worse, isn't that the company that my doctor's office that I bring my kids to
Oh yeah, good
users.
point.
Like, right?
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
its own extra level of insanity almost. So yeah, I mean, sorry, lost my train of thought.
I know I'm the king of triggering that. I know that the first time I saw someone use it was literally, well, it must have been at least three NCEs ago. We had a client. It was one of my favorite clients, but he's since retired and his practice got bought by PE, so we're not even going to talk about but he showed me, he had his phone and he said, yeah, this is what I do. I put the phone in and I do this recording. And at first I was like, what? This can't really work. Or like, how is this different from Dragon? Okay. It's just,
Right.
Yep.
And then you see it the first time, you're like, well, this is totally different from just transcription. Like it organizes it. It pressed me. But when I dug into it, and this is very much, I'm not going to name the vendor. This is very much one of the vendors. Not only did we talk to, but it was probably the most common vendor of everyone we spoke to. And
For
I would later
pediatric.
on,
Yeah.
in our space. And I was stunned by their disinterest in doing it what we perceive as the right way. And we were like, we can hand over a lot of pediatricians to you. You just have to work with us and protect the data. But I think that classic internet maximum, if the product is cheap, you're the product. And this is my fear. You guys tell me if my fear is exaggerated or unfounded. My fear is this. All of these AI vendors, it's a land grab, okay? This is the gold rush. You're going to stake claims. And I predict within a year or two, some of these vendors will have enough input from doctors that specialty specific. You're now going to get all of these AI vendors are going to come back fully branded for each specialty. All right. So, I almost named someone, but like this AI, which has been generally generic for the last 2 or 3 years, is going to come back with their specific pediatric version, which has been trained by hundreds or thousands of pediatricians, all of whom paid for that. All of them paid their own money to train this thing. And that's the whole purpose. The reason it's cheap relatively is because they are training these models. And then it also becomes a valuable product for other people who aren't taking chart notes. You want to start asking, you want to say, so what would a pediatrician say in this instance? How would a pediatrician think in that instance? If you're doing drug testing or you want to release a product into the pediatric space, you have this language model that was taught by thousands of practice visits. You know what that's worth to a marketing team?
Probably a lot.
That's my
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, like, I try not to worry about that too much. There are certainly, because you can drive yourself crazy with that,
Right.
sort of thought process. There's certainly, one thing I will say is there certainly are more and more ambient scribe vendors popping up left and right, and many of them purport to have certain certifications that they probably don't have, which is
really
fascinating. A really, really fascinating thing to watch. And generally you only get that sort of commentary from the certain Reddit corners of the internet of users bringing up, like, wait a minute, I've looked at this list and this company isn't on there. In fact, this company is not even registered as an LLC or anything like that. It's just some guy. So
the certification
certainly,
came from their LLM creating the website.
So certainly, like, if you aren't a PCC client, or you are a PCC client that's currently not using PCC Scribe, you want to stick to the vendors that you would kind of think of as far as that your colleagues have mentioned in the past, rather than kind of going off the beaten path and going onto Google and searching ambient scribe for pediatrics.
Brian, I did find a vendor that labeled themselves as ambient scribe for pediatrics. And so I'm like, all right, what makes them pediatric? Did they put in all of the Bright Futures content? None of that was there. And you couldn't find out who was behind the business. I emailed them to say, tell me about your pediatric specificity. And they're like, it works great for pediatricians. And I'm like, oh, yeah.
Does it?
And I don't think they exist anymore, but the snake oil in this
I think
is
the big,
substantial.
and maybe Brian was about to say this as well, but in that list of sort of dangers about weird, sort of dodgy various AI service providers, certainly Ambient Scribe, one of the big ones we considered early on was how many of these guys, once the sort of market thinning occurs, because like you said, it is a bit of a gold rush right now, once the different LLM costs change and sort of get to different points, especially considering the various energy issues that the world is facing right now. Not all of these companies are going to exist for the long haul, so to speak. And so how do you really make informed decisions about partnering with one of them? I think that still remains to be seen. I think the landscape of ambient scribe providers is going to be very different in the next few years.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. We so to bring it back to kind of where I was going with all of this, you're currently listening to the attention deficit disorder podcast, I think, between the three of us. That's what
totally
makes us
true.
all fun. But as we were looking through these vendors, we kind of, at least I realized that it didn't seem like there was much of a special sauce. There's certainly nice to haves as far as there are certain features like retrieval augmented generation or RAG, which allows us to look at things like Chip was mentioning as far as like the bright futures information or pull up these details at request rather than having it built into the large language model. But we would sit there with these scribe vendors and we would really dive in and ask them very directly, what foundational model are you using? And when you think of a foundational model, what that means is like the OpenAI chat GPTs of the world, or Anthropic Claude, or Google Gemini. Like, what are you using as the basis for your model, and do you fine tune it at all? And a lot of the answer that we found was, they would I think a little bit about answering those questions, but generally we would get the answer. And oftentimes there wasn't much fine tuning going on. A lot of it was related to retrieval augmented generation, or just to really understanding what kind of prompt is going in to get the right output back for these like structured documents from a variety of sources. And so to us, when we're looking at this is how much it would cost to integrate with this vendor, and then this is the cost that would be passed on to our clients. We don't control that cost at all, where the billing is done through the third party. And then we can flip to the other side and say, okay, let's look at, Chip and Scott know this. I spun up a prototype. I had a week off and I just spent some time just coding out what like my best approximation of an ambient scribe. And so once we had
what platform did you do that on originally?
What platform?
Yeah.
So that was built. It's not like our EHR. It's a web-based platform. So it's kind of
but
like.
Did you do that on a little Raspberry Pi?
Well, so I do have a Raspberry Pi off camera that's running a local large language model, but it was.
So there you go.
Essentially, it was. I'm a big nerd for these sorts of small large language models and open source projects like that. But the original idea was the idea of sending a patient's visit data anywhere outside of our systems, which are generally on-premises or client-specific systems, is a terrifying proposition no matter what. For the sake of privacy for the patient, for the sake of legality for the clinician. And so my initial vision was like, how much can we get away with here doing it all on just a laptop? How well can we do with no internet connection using an open source large language model? The answer turns out to be pretty well. Like, thinking about how far to dive into this. Sorry, whoever added to.
Yeah, I already said the words Raspberry Pi. So 1% of our audience is hooked.
Yeah. We started looking at kind of the hardware limitations that we face among all of our clients, as far as like, most clients are using a laptop, but the variety of hardware differences between those laptops is vast. Yeah. So the hosting a large language model directly on their machine kind of quickly became out of the question. It is a very cool party trick for sure. But then we turned to like, okay, how much of this pipeline can PCC own and sort of ensure ourselves by doing our own auditing on it? And that's how we landed where we are, which is that we do all the transcription. PCC at a cloud level, we do all the transcription of the audio. We do all of the pre-processing of the transcript before it's actually turned into a generated, what we call a draft chart note. And then we work with a third-party LLM provider and use their models. And also, that's all I have to say. I can repeat that if you want.
No, but when you did your little experiment, I was so desperate for us to be able to have each practice host their own. We all understand why that's not possible. Or I will say why it's not possible yet.
why it's not possible yet. Like I'll just jump in for a moment just to explain to the listeners. Like we experimented with what it would take for PCC to host our own foundational models, and really we're trying to align 3 different points of a triangle. There's the affordability, there's the quality, and then there's the security pieces. And we're trying to
usually
hit that
2 of those legs are skipped at any given time.
Yes. Yep.
That's
Especially when we look at some of the big scribe vendors out there in the world, that some of those legs are skipped. But the optimal position is right in the center where you can kind of match the expectations everywhere. With PCC doing our own foundational model, amazing security, amazing quality, but the affordability is just not there because we can't send it
in 2026.
Today. Yeah. So we wanted to chart, we wanted to look towards the future, if you will, and kind of say, how do we set ourselves up for a future where we can come back to this idea without sacrificing security, quality, and affordability right now?
And if we were to lock in to some third-party candidate, we would then be dependent on our API relationship, their prompting, all of the stuff on the backside. And when the world RAM crisis resolves or whatever's going to happen and the prices come down, everyone gets an NVIDIA card or whatever. Then that gives us the opportunity to make everyone self-hosted, which is really the dream of every open source nerd on the planet. That just is. So that's interesting. Now, once we decided that, okay, here's the framework for what we're going to do, I'm curious what kind of, if you had any surprises about, okay, we want to implement this, but what kind of things are we now learning about pediatric workflow? Or what did you not understand what did you not understand that now makes you an expert because you do?
That's a great question, Chip. I know everything. No, I think the thing to me that was, that we've, I think, come to accept and really embrace is, I'll just give this anecdote here. The way that we validated this approach was by launching that web platform that I described. So this prototype web platform, doctors who use PCC EHR to use this platform and test it out, and they did something that we thought was awesome, but didn't ask them to do directly, which is testing it while also using the ambient scribe that they're usually using. Yeah. So we actually, we decided not to give them that instruction. We thought it would be cool, but many of them started doing it that way and then ended up using our scribe most of the time, or just using it occasionally, but saying, oh, I like this and this better from the PCC scribe, or actually, I'm using the PCC scribe 100% of the time now because it's just perfect for me. But the thing that I learned immediately was I set up this beautiful default SOAP note template where I was like, oh, this is perfect. This seems like this is going to work great for the doctors that are going to use this. And immediately I was proven wrong of what sections they wanted, what instructions they wanted. And I think that's what we've all learned on the team, is to lean into the customizability of the templates.
Yeah.
And really just lean on actual clinicians who are doing this work to drive what our expectations are for these templates, and what they actually want to see. And we've also learned the quality of the output of these draft chart notes in any scribe is completely subjective. One clinician could see, or 2 clinicians could see the same exact note from the same exact visit, and one would say, oh, this is perfect, this is exactly what I wanted, and another one could say, well, I want this language to be more clinical here and less clinical there, or I wanted this in a bulleted list. So it's really all about making sure that there is a decent amount of customizability for the user to do. And I think that's something that we've nailed with PCC Scribe, where it's if you don't like something, you can change it. And even more powerful, you can change it while you're generating the note. You can generate the note multiple times from one visit and just sit there and really configure and dive into your templates and make sure that it is working exactly the way you want it to.
I think one of the things that the AI Scribe process is underscoring for our entire community is that there isn't a single target for any section of the note. We know this because Brian, you said an AI Scribe generated note might work really well for one physician and not as well for another. I'm just going to say a physician created note works really well. It's not it's not the AI. It's not the scribe. It's that you all, and I'm looking right in the camera at you all, have such very different ways and needs for how you want to see your information. That one seemed, it's so obvious in retrospect, but it did catch me by surprise. I mean, it's just so obvious. I just meant I never thought past what happens after I'm done talking, because I never think about that. It creates, like, what comes out is totally dependent on what you've told it to do. And at the end, this is so true of so many parts of every EHR. I don't want to say the easy part is creating the technical pieces. It's just that's the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It's configuring it all so it fits. There are days I wake up and I wish we didn't give our clients so many options. I wish we just told everyone, like, this is how you're going to chart. We wouldn't sell anything, but the ones who had it would love it, because it would be like, we'd be 5 years ahead of where we are, because we don't have to slow down and, like, consider the user. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm right. I'm going to see if I'm not supposed to ever ask questions where people don't know the answer, but I'll ask a question right now. You know, we've had a decent number of our clients playing with this already, and they've been working on the prompts. And I mean, we're not fools. We choose clients who we know are, like, nerdy like we are, and are going to use it and leverage it. What are some of the surprising things you've seen our clients do that you're allowed to say? I can think of at least one or two things that I know our clients went and did where we're like, stop doing that. Like, get back asking it to do your coding. All right, we're not going to talk about that. But what were some surprising things that you saw that clients figured out on their own that weren't on your radar right away?
Oh, I mean, you took one off the table that definitely.
Yeah, we're not talking about that one.
Yeah,
yet.
I think, you know, we have one client in particular who was actually the first to see the prototype at the PCC users conference last year. And they really liked, they had the Scribe tool that they use most of the time allows them to generate, like, letters and documents from their Scribe session, which is certainly something that we, you know, look towards in the future. But with the original web tool, that was a possibility, as far as you can set up templates that make this possible from the input text, and you can add certain input text in a notepad feature, which is something that's made it over into the integrated version in the EHR. So I think that surprised me a lot. Essentially, they were so keen on being able to do that they brute forced the tool to be able to do it. That was cool. I think something that we've learned in tandem with the clients that we thought was really interesting is just how powerful, you know, we had some concerns back and forth about exactly how we were doing the templating. You see in a variety of tools, like, the setting up templates is very different depending on what you're looking at. It could be a bunch of checkboxes. It could be, like, you know, drop down selections of, like, kind of the style that you want. What we did for the prototype version and then continued on with in the integrated version is you have a text box. You get to very explicitly, or as least, you could leave it blank and it'll do a pretty good job most of the time, but you get to describe exactly what you want, or you can sit there and you can lay out a format of what you want. So if you want something very structured, you can, in each section of your template, you can sit there and say, oh, when this happens, you know, say this word in this spot, but if that doesn't happen, put this other word instead, and you can really build out some really incredible things. What we learned from having kind of this free form interaction was LLMs in general are very good at building that kind of template. So we talk a lot about, you were kind of discussing it with, or touching on it with the, I wish we could just build whatever we want. But the feedback loop is really important between us as developers and the user, like understanding what the user needs to get out of it. And if we've gotten something right or wrong, or like how we can slightly adjust something to make it way better. The same is true between the clinician and their ambient scribe, especially in our case, where, you know, as alluding to the power of being able to regenerate your note multiple times, you might sit there and say, okay, here's like the original draft chart note that PCC Scribe has come up with. I'm going to, you know, there's nothing identifying in this information. I'm going to put it into another LLM and say, like, or I'm going to adjust it to exactly how I want it to be, put it into another LLM and say, can you help me make a template that does exactly this? Like, here's the exact output, or here's the exact information that I have in my template right now. Here's what it came out with from this visit. You know, of course, you know, any identifying information removed from that, or even further than that, you can just describe what's wrong. And then LLMs are very good at generating that template back. And so that's something that our clinicians working with figured out pretty quickly. And
that's a really cool idea. How do I make, and just for the non-nerdy among us, what seems like a very complicated thing is not. It's just that our AI tool doesn't have a prompt like ChatGPT and Gemini. So people are taking the output of our AI tool, putting it into a prompt, saying, make it cooler, what would I have to ask it to do this? And then you put that back in the instructions that we provide. All right, ready? This is the world's worst idea. I might remove this from the podcast. Have you guys ever played a prank on someone? Like you grab their iPhone and you do the text substitution stuff?
Yep.
So that every time someone types yes, it says no. You could go into someone's AI configuration and add a bunch of stuff to the prompt so that it always says.
I feel like we used to do that with bash aliases when it was earlier PCC days.
That's why
do I just always
go
Chip.
Yes. Yeah. That's just what, you know what? That's a lesson. You still have to review your notes before you hit.
Well, that's exactly why we call it the draft chart note. This was another thing where a lot of the vendors that we spoke to external to PCC were like, it's it comes out perfect every time.
No such thing.
It does not. And what you need to know as a medical professional is that as soon as this is in your chart, it is your words, right?
Right.
Like from a legal perspective, this is a tool that is assisting you. And so we have really thought, I believe, and from all the feedback we've received so far, really thoughtfully designed the process of, okay, here's your draft chart note. Like, we're not sitting there being like, are you sure you reviewed it? But there's just enough friction in that process of inserting it into your chart where we really want you to read through it and make sure it represents your words appropriately. Because the worst thing that could possibly happen with any of these tools, and we know this is already happening out in the wild, is people going on autopilot and just assuming, like, yes, it's fine.
Yes.
Especially for notes that, or like sections of notes that the patient may see, to have that reaction of, I didn't say that in the visit, or like, I didn't express that at all. That's a really great way to break the trust between the patient and the clinician.
Brian, you just said something that I want the listeners to hear, because I don't think the people who end up having to use our software, anyone's software, understand this. So you just said, like, we tried to strike a balance between making it really easy and fast and having just enough friction to slow them down and have them pause and consider, make sure that what's in there is right. And that's something I want you to hear. I'm not saying this in defense of all EHR vendors, okay? People have heard me say this plenty of times. We sell sadness. That's our business. We just want to sell you as little sadness as possible. So many times, what do I hear? I just heard it at the conferences this week. Oh, it's too many clicks to do this. I got to get my staff to fix this because when they do this wrong, I've got 3 clicks. And some portion of those clicks, even for the mediocre vendors, are to slow you down. Some of those clicks are actually not because the EHR is poorly designed. It's that because you as the user are going to, without those signs or those signals, those speed bump ahead elements, without those things there, you just, because you're human, click through so much so fast that garbage gets in there. We know that we've seen this so many times. That's why when you close a window on every operating system there is, it will say, are you sure? And, the power users, because I would always turn that off. Yeah, I'm clicking it because I'm sure. And 4 times a year, I nuke a window that I wish I hadn't, or whatever. Yep. Like, that's just, and so we build some of those things in. And it's just how and where we decide to do it. Well, that's the PCC flavor. Other people have other flavors.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, to that point, you hear a lot more about the debate of sort of AI in the loop versus human in the loop. This is getting into the weeds a little bit at this point, but I think healthcare, anything where there's significant trust and patient safety concerns and security, this is a place in which the human touch is going to continue to be needed and is a critical part of how we deploy solutions like this one. But I think is going to be kind of a guiding principle in how we approach, whatever next frontiers we get into with AI assisted tooling, especially as you look at some of the more agentic workflows, various sort of next steps that we might look into. This is kind of, a guiding paradigm, I think, that we'll have to keep centered.
You just opened Pandora's box, Scott. So I'm going to call an audible, which I'm now mixing sports references and Raspberry Pi references in the same podcast. What we're going to do is I'm going to say thank you to you guys, but this isn't the end. We're going to keep talking in a minute, or as we go past me here in a second, because I want to now get into the agentic stuff and how that's going to affect us. I think physicians are really going to need to understand what this means for us in the future. But now we're way off course for the podcast. We'll prop that up somewhere else. But I'm just going to say thank you to you two for coming to the podcast. I hope this was enlightening to someone. We certainly welcome questions and comments about AI and a scribe. I mean, and this very, very razor specific utilization of AI in your practices.
Thank you for listening. More information can be found in our show notes. Production and editing by Chip Hart, Ali Squires, and Chris Forleo. Music by Challenger C. I'm Mark Herney.